Hello, my name is Charles Syms. I'm with the faculty at the University of Buffalo School of Social Work. I'm here with Mike Langlois, who is licensed clinical social worker in several states and who specializes in technology and social work. And today we're talking about games and gamification, which is another opening or a burgeoning field in social work, or I like to think or believe it's a burgeoning field of social work, but it really is an emerging field in social work, and using these technologies in social work practice. Mike is very well versed in this, so I'd like to open up our conversation today, Mike, with is there a difference between game and gamification, or gaming and gamification, and what might that be?
Yes, there is a difference, and I think it's a pretty easy one to explain. Let's see how I do.
Okay.
For gaming basically means the act of playing any number of video games or digital games or online games. And video games are a form of play. They're a 21st century form of play. They're also a form of social media, more and more now than they were. Gamification is a term which means basically the application of principles of game design to things that aren't video games. So, for example, if we were to try to make a game of me getting my shoes tied fast,
okay,
and what we wanted to do is to encourage me to tie my shoes faster. Gamification would be, okay, we're going to set a timer and we're going to see if you can beat your last time, Mike, where I'm competing with the clock. So that's a game principle that's applied to a non-game event. So gamification is just that, basically applying principles of play in video games or gaming to things that aren't video games or playing.
Okay, so then how would gamification then, I'm thinking that's what we're probably talking more about, how might that apply to social work practice? 'Cause, I mean, we have this micro, meso, macro kind of thing. So is it strictly a micro kind of issue, technology or technique, or can it be expanded to others? So I guess I'm asking a whole bunch of questions because I'm at the same time, but I'm wondering how do we apply gamification to social work?
Well, I think there are lots of ways we can do it. And in fact, social work is a little later to the party than the business industry or even education, but other parts of other sectors are already using gamification. Ways we could use it would range from behavior modification, so or parent guidance, or the example I'm going to give you is parent guidance about behavior modification. So say you have a child that doesn't want to clean their room, and you are trying to figure out a way to have them clean their room where you don't get into fights with them. So the example of gamification would be, you're going to have a clock and set a timer, and if they can clean their room in under 10 minutes, they get X prize. If they clean their room in under 5 minutes, they get Y prize. So you've already kind of included, and I'm saying 5 and 10 minutes because we're thinking of shorter intervals for kids. I mean, if we could get a kid spending 10 minutes cleaning their room, that's pretty good. So those are examples of how you can use gamification and do parent guidance with it.
Wow, that's interesting. So it can be something as simple as setting up a clock and a time expectation. Is there ways to make this more? Is there a way to introduce games themselves into the intervention process?
There's a few different ways we could do it. I mean, first off, to coin a phrase, there's an app for that.
Yes.
There's a great app that you can get for smartphones, and I think for non-iPhones, Androids as well, called Epic Win, where you can program in different tasks that people need to achieve in order to get a certain number of points. And when they use the app, once they do the thing, say, for example, clean your room, since we're on clean your room, they push that they've achieved that, and bells and whistles go off, they've earned points, they progress on a map further to a mysterious destination, they may unlock a treasure. All these sort of graphics and interesting, enriched media experiences can be used to actually hook kids in, to be curious about stuff. I wonder what's the next thing I could win. I wonder what the next place I'll go. So those are examples of how you can use gamification and media. Video games, that's another matter.
Okay, okay. Let me ask you this. So my guess is you've worked and you've done this, and you know you've worked with families or parents and kids around this. How do parents react when you first start suggesting some of these different kinds of techniques or introducing technology into the process of working with their kids?
Well, you know, a lot of times parents are a little resistant. They'll say they're using the smartphone too much, or they're using the iPad too much. And I help them sort of flip it and say, okay, you've got your child or your adolescent that is willing to pay attention and respond to this little thing. You want to work with that. You want to go with that. You want to somehow co-opt some of that power for yourself. And so the trick is to sort of go with it. I think one of the things, you know, people that have been listening to some of these examples may be thinking, hey, this sounds kind of familiar. It just seems like behavior modification or reinforcement. And in fact, it is to a large extent. And so some of the conversations you may have with clients or their families are the same, which is, well, how isn't that bribery? What's the difference between reinforcement and bribery? And those are conversations social workers are used to having with sticker charts or other things. I think the challenge is to help parents and educators accept that sticker charts just aren't as exciting or engaging or fun as having an achievement unlock on a video game. And the good news is you can actually go on websites now and generate little achievement badges so that when somebody, again, cleans their room, you can go online and type a reward that you can then print out or send to them that says, achievement unlocked, you cleaned your room, 20 points. That just seems like it's going to be more engaging or exciting for a lot of kids than a sticker.
I teach at the university, and I'm wondering if you've thought about gamification or gaming with higher education or with an eye towards education. I know you teach also, so I'm wondering if you've considered that, and if you have some examples of how you've managed to integrate that into your teaching practice.
Well, I have in the class I teach on social work and technology, one of the projects that's part of what the students need to do is a social innovation project where they pick an oppressed population or a particular problem or psychiatric concern and create a game that's going to help people. And so, for example, my last semester's class did this really cool psychoeducational game that was designed to help people that were in the prison system that were being released to be able to negotiate the many issues that could come up after being incarcerated for many years. So, for example, the game that they designed took into account educating people about 20-year differences in technology or what the world looked like now as opposed to then. And they were coming up with all sorts of other ideas about this. Another group of people in the semester past decided they wanted to do one that focused on veterans. And veterans, one of the things they noticed was that veterans needed different skills pre-deployment, during deployment, and post-deployment. That, for example, being hyper-vigilant is not really successful pre-deployment, really important in deployment, and then kind of detrimental post-deployment. So they had designed an elaborate game where they basically didn't penalize people for these various skills, but helped them see that they were differentially needed.
I see. Are there examples of gamification in current practice that if somebody were interested that you could point to or that they could go and say, okay, let me see what this looks like in real terms? Because I think some of us sometimes, we can talk about it and we can think about it, but we don't really get a sense of it or really have an understanding of what it really involves. And I'll tell you why I'm thinking that. I often in my assignments ask my students to rather than to select an intervention and then actually do that intervention before, because everybody's about going out and telling clients to do it without necessarily understanding what it takes to do it, what the experience is like. Excuse me. So they come back and say, well, it didn't work real well. And so we sit down and we start talking about it, and they can explain, as they're explaining it to me, it might be, well, did you consider the fact that the person doesn't have a car or doesn't have access to a phone in a way that you well, no, I just followed the directions. So I guess I'm wondering, are there opportunities for out there that people can see some of this actual practice, or somebody who may have posted it on a YouTube video and show this is how this works?
So there's a couple of things. I mean, there are some things I have in my blog that certainly people can find. But I'm also thinking about some of the things we call serious games, which is a branch of video games, which are designed to help people with, for example, social justice issues. Okay. So one of them that's pretty well known is Darfur is Dying, where people experience psychoeducation about what it would be like to be in a region that's affected by genocide, poverty, all those concerns, by playing this particular game and trying to help a particular character in the game survive. Now, what's interesting about that is what you're seeing is an example of gamification being applied to the task of learning about genocide, learning about social oppression. And so you get a bunch of different things in there for social work students. One is you get the actual psychoeducation of what some of that experience or might be like. You also get an example of the application of video game principles on something that's not a video game. Genocide is not a video game. And then you have the very important social work context, which is, how do people feel about playing a game about something so horrific? That it should be something that stirs a bunch of different qualms or thoughts in people. Is this a learning opportunity? Is this cultural tourism? Is it a bunch of different things? And so I think gamification is one layer of that assignment if you have students play Darfur is Dying. But hopefully people are going to get feelings ranging from an insight to outrage at the idea that, someone in the first world has designed this particular thing.
Might be an interesting conversation to have on an ethical level as well as in the experiential level of what that might feel like in that particular country. Right. One more question, and again, I'm thinking about individuals who might want to bring this into either their practice or an educator bringing it into the school. Are there places? Is there a centralized, repository, or is there places that an individual can go to begin to parcel out or to find those kinds of social work-oriented technologies that are more game-oriented? Or is it one of these things where I hear about it from someone else, who hears about it from someone else, who hears about it from someone else? So I'm wondering if that exists.
It's interesting, and I don't know if this is tangential, but let's hope it's not. That one of my colleagues, Dana Boyd, talked about Facebook recently, and she talked about how Facebook is an anomaly. And the reason it's an anomaly is that everyone we know is on it. And that historically when technology comes out, that happens, but then it's a blip in the pan. So for example, 1,000 years ago, everyone read the Bible. That was the book everyone read. And that was the only book sometimes everyone read. But then when literacy improved and the printing press showed up and people had access to more different things, we had this proliferation of books. And so now everyone isn't always reading the Bible. They're often reading a number of different things. So The equivalent I see now is with websites, that if you Googled social games or gamification, you would get a number of different websites. And that's because there's now a proliferation of resources. They're not all good resources, but there's a lot of different places people can go. So there isn't one particular repository. In fact, because of the way search engines work, ironically, if you did social work and gamification, what you'd probably pull up is my blog, because there aren't a lot of social workers yet writing about gamification. But hopefully, in the longer run, there's going to be a lot of different resources. But if people wanted to start learning about this, they could start Googling things like social games, serious games. They could start. The last thing I'd say about this is, I think more often than not, video games used therapeutically are better than therapeutic video games, because they have a lot more industry, talent, and money, resources, and media. They're a common language already with people. People know about certain things. And that there are growing numbers of independent video games that are then being published, like for example on PlayStation, that are really good. So that one example is this game called Papo.io, which is an independent video game designer who got vetted and published through the PlayStation. And the game is on the surface about a little boy and this monster that loses control and how he solves problems. But then through flashbacks and cutscenes as you progress through the game, you realize this is also about an adult looking back on his childhood with an alcoholic parent who was violent and abusive, and how he comes to terms with that. I think those games have a lot more resources and creativity behind them sometimes.
If I were a social work clinician, or if I were a social work clinician and I was thinking, after listening to you or reading your blog, thinking, geez, you know, I really want to expand my practice or my work. How might I get ready to do that? If I were a person who was looking at extending myself into gamification or gamification in my practice, how might I set myself up for that? What things might I consider doing, or how might I consider that work?
Well, I have an easy answer for that, although a lot of people aren't going to like it. And the easy answer is start playing video games. Start actually having the experience of playing these video games. We take literacy for granted because we all learn to read. We didn't get through graduate school if we weren't able to have a certain amount of literacy. Having literacy with games means having experience playing them, failing, and succeeding with them. So that, for example, Minecraft is a wonderful open-ended sort of sandbox game, which means that you can do a lot of creativity. There's no one goal in it. If you have people starting to play around with that game, they can start to think about how they might want to apply their theory or their practice, or how certain things might resonate with their particular patient. So for example, if they're playing Minecraft and they notice that this creature called the creeper will sneak up to them and explode, they may start thinking, this reminds me of that kid that has problems with his anger management. Right. And gee, I notice he plays Minecraft. Maybe I can start talking with him about what the creeper in him is like and how to make sure he doesn't explode. Right. So really the answer in some ways is simple but hard. We're used to reading theoretical books and textbooks, and in fact what I'm asking us to do is something very different, which is to start immersing ourselves in the clumsiness of play, and then think critically about the themes and what comes up for us in the act of playing.
Yeah, I'm thinking, as you said that, actually, the way to introduce is to begin to practice or to play yourself. I was sitting here thinking, this is exactly what we did with videos. Yep. Before, people didn't use videos. They didn't use movies. You didn't use movies as part of your work. But as we have progressed, we've seen those connections and recognize that people have those connections and that we can utilize those connections in practice. So it makes perfect sense to me.
It's in keeping with what you were saying earlier about interventions and how we have our students go out and try the intervention before we recommend it. Video games can be an intervention, but I think we need to have our students and have our colleagues trying these interventions so that they can really have a sense. Because what a video game is like when you're playing it and what it's like when you're looking over the shoulder of someone playing it can be very different.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense to me. I wonder if there's, I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to share concerning gaming, games, and social work practice in general. Have you thought? Have you given some consideration to some of the ethical issues that might go along with this? Should we? Are there ethical issues around explaining to people why you're asking them to engage in this kind of work? I'm thinking of informed consent about this, or
yeah, you know,
too far out there.
No, I don't think so, because I don't think we can have it both ways. We can't say that playing video games has an impact, but then say, oh, well, we don't have to look at anything ethical about it because it's not real. Well, yes, it has an impact. So I've gotten much more, I used to be very much more in the camp of let's not jump to ethics first. And to a degree, I still think that there's a lot of things that we do that we don't talk about the ethical implications. Like we don't ask people, you know, before we play checkers today or Connect 4, I really want to sort of explain to you why I'm doing it, because we're going to be learning about taking turns and competition. You know, we basically just do it. That being said, I do think video games are impactful, and I don't think every video game is useful for every particular kid. I think some video games can be too overstimulating or overwhelming. I think that some video games, really we want parental consent, and I want the parents to be trying and previewing the games before they play them.
Yes.
You know, a lot of times I have parents asking me, well, what games should I allow my kid to play? And I never answer that question other than to say, you know, parenting doesn't have settings that you can park your kids on. You need to sit there with them and play it before they see it and see whether it fits with your family's values. So back to informed consent. I think we need to talk about we need to keep issues of privacy. I think it's important to make sure that if we're using games, they're either not online where they're open and that they're HIPAA compliant as much as possible, or we need to help patients understand that they can waive their right to HIPAA if we think it's useful, but then we better explain why we think it's useful. So for example, if I set up a Minecraft server that isn't HIPAA compliant because that technology isn't available, but I think it's going to be useful creating a peer group for kids that have school phobia.
Okay.
I can ask the parents to consider waiving their right to HIPAA because of that technology, but I better explain to them why it would be so important that they want to consider that. And why it's so important is that it may give them a peer group that is together by interest and affinity, that it makes it easier for them to go back to school, for example. But that there may be some risks with it. They may have chat that is a little escalated. There may be concerns with privacy. So I don't think ethics has no place in discussion around this. I just think it needs to not be the first thing, because a lot of times we talk about ethics because we're scared. And I think we need to, you know, think a little bit more and play a little bit more with these games before we jump to that.
Okay. I'm wondering if there's anything that we haven't covered that you think might be really important, or that you think might be important to add to this discussion on gaming and gamification.
Just play more games. Just try things. You know, I think in education, and especially higher education, we learn to figure out what our area of strength is and then hunker down and silo into it as much as possible. And playing video games can make a lot of social workers feel clumsy, feel frustrated, yes, feel stupid, feel overwhelmed. In short, feel how our patients feel much of the time they come to see us. And I think there's a value to that. So play more games.
Well, thank you for your time. That's you're going to make me go out and play a game now.